Welcome to the course Qualitative Methods for Business and Management. The topic of this brief video lecture is the design of case studies. Here's an overview of the different dimensions that we need to consider when we design case study research. As we had discussed in a separate lecture, first of all, we need to figure out which worldviews, which paradigms we are following. Positivism or interpretivism. In case study research, this is important because the method per se is philosophically neutral, meaning that we can use it in both positivistic as well as in interpretivistic traditions. The second step is to understand which our research objective is. Are we using case study for purposes of description, for purpose of exploration, or purpose of explanation? This too is covered in a separate lecture. What this lecture is about is to understand case study design in the variants single, multiple, and unit of analysis in the variants holistic and embedded. To put that together, we can basically differentiate four types of case study designs. On the upper left in this quadrant, you'll see a single case holistic design, where the case, whatever that might be, very often it's the organization, is also the unit of analysis. So, for example, our case could be about Edeka Digital, so the organization that looks after information technology for a large retail company. We can distinguish these types of design from so-called multiple case designs, where our case study actually involves multiple cases, each of which is our unit of analysis. So, for example, we could have a case study where we compare how four different retail organizations deal with technology management. Say Edeka, Aldi, Rewe, and Walmart, or any other type of organization. These types of holistic designs, single case holistic design or multiple case holistic design, can be differentiated from so-called embedded designs, where the difference is that a case can have multiple units of analysis. So, for example, in a single case embedded design, we could have one organization in which we follow two different projects at the same time. Say a process redesign project and a new product development project within the same organization. And of course, we could have an embedded multiple case design where we look at the, let's say, multiple projects, say multiple innovation projects across four different types of retail organizations. There are some particularities here that are worth noting. First, single case designs, holistic or embedded, are very often argued to be idiosyncratic, meaning that they only speak to the single case in itself. Yeah. So single cases do not afford great potential for developing abstract generalizable theory because our observation is limited to this one case, right? However, this can still be very, very useful for purpose of knowledge contributions, for example, to develop new explanations. But what is important is that if we are choosing a single case research design, typically it is expected that a particular rationale applies to the case that we're studying. For example, it's completely appropriate to study a single case if the case is critical. Yeah, so it meets all of the conditions that we need to, let's say, test a theory to do something else. It's also a perfectly fine rationale if the case is unique, so the case is extreme or rare. An example of that could be a natural event such as an earthquake or a volcano eruption and what that does to the local business ecosystem. That is a pretty unique or extreme or rare case. A third type of single case rationale is a revelatory case. A revelatory case is that the case presents a previously inaccessible opportunity or the first opportunity to study an emergent phenomena in depth. Yeah, so the case gives us access to something that up to that point wasn't really accessible to us for a variety of reasons. So it reveals a lot of new insights that otherwise would have been impossible to get. A fourth case and a fifth case are longitudinal and representative cases. These cases one has to say have weaker rationals, but one rationale that could be applied, and it is being applied and argued, is that a case is longitudinal, meaning that in this case, a subject matter is studied over a period of time, typically a long period of time. For example, we could look at the digital transformation of Deutsche Bank over a 15-year window. Here, the argument is that it's such you need so much effort and resource commitment to study one case over such a long period of time. You can't really demand of a research team to do multiple of these. That's basically how the reasoning goes. And finally, some people argue that single cases could be appropriate because they're representative. In other words, they're typical for certain everyday, generalizable, common situations. But if that were the case, one has to say, it should also be possible to study multiple cases. So this type of single case rationale is usually not as strong as the other ones. Here is one example that I was involved in together with Stefan Seidel. That's the picture of the gentleman on the right, which is an example of a single case where we argued the case was particularly revelatory. This study was about how software development companies develop software that they use themselves to become more sustainable. Yeah, so these were companies that over 15 years ago, in 2008 and 9, started to think about that they need to have more environmentally oriented practices. They need to cut down on the carbon footprint. They need to reduce energy consumption, etc. Not right now, after we've had Fridays for Future movements and so forth, but over 15 years ago. And at that time, that was a very unique, in a sense, this was an initiative that wasn't very common. So this was an opportunity to study such a development, also because this company is a world leading company in software development, and it uses its own company. So it's very revealing in the sense that this particular case allowed us to study how we can use software to become greener, and also how we can both look at software design and software use. Yeah, so here the argument was made that this is a revelatory case that allows us to study such a situation, such as subject matters, how do companies transform to become green, using a case that reveals a lot of insights that were usually not accessible at that time. Contrasting single case designs are multiple case designs. The advantage of multiple case designs is, of course, that we have more complete evidence. Yeah, which means that any findings that we can generate from multiple cases appears more robust and more generalizable. What is also very common is that whatever rationale we usually apply for single cases, uniqueness, extremeness, revelatory, they typically cannot be satisfied by multiple cases. It's very hard to imagine four concurrent, unique, or extreme cases. Of course, one disadvantage is that multiple case studies require a lot more resources and time. Furthermore, they require what is called a replication logic, which means a heuristic by which the additional cases, in addition to that single case, are being selected. Here's one example, again, where I was involved in with, at that time, my doctoral student, Julian, picture on the right. What we did here is we studied German startups that operated in the financial sector. So you would call them fintech startups. And we studied 6 of them at the same time from the moment of their birth, so when the company was founded, to the point they were established players in the market. So here it wasn't particularly revelatory, but because we studied 6 different startups that all offered different types of solutions, but all of them were fintech startups, we could trace a little bit more robustly how digital ventures, so how digital startups in a particularly regulatory sector, financial services sector, what they do to bring about their offerings and enter a market. So, as I said, replication logic is a key thing in multiple case study research. We need a heuristic by which we select the multiple cases. Yeah? And here we have different types of logics that exist how we can select these additional cases. The first one is called snowball sampling logic. Here we select cases throughout the project when there is a need for another case, and then depending on what we already know, we go and try to find an organization or another case that allows us to dig a certain insight further. For example, you might imagine that you could study hybrid learning at a university, and you do that at Hamburg, and you realize, well, actually, there is not that much hybrid learning. Most of that is in classroom, in presence learning, and with the occasional online lecture, such as this one. And as you realize this insight, maybe there is a need to study a different type of university that has a more digital teaching offering to sort of allow you to gain more insights into how that would work. And then, for example, you could decide to study Fernuniversität Hagen. Yeah, that would be an example of snowball sampling. A second type of logic is what's called literal replication. This is a mechanism to build credibility. We try to find additional cases that are very similar, identical to the original case. Yeah, so the idea would be that you literally take the same organization and the same cases to see whether you can replicate what you learned about the first case in all the other cases as well. Because if so, then it seems that these learnings would apply to any case, even those that you haven't studied. That's a literal replication logic. So an example would be that you start studying retail organization, Edeka, and then you would replicate it by studying other German retailers, yeah, Rewe, Aldi, and so forth. Finally, a third logic is called theoretical sampling logic. In this heuristic, we select additional cases based on specific theoretical expectations that we generate from our initial cases. So if we find, for example, in one case that your propensity to engage in digital innovation is really all top-down, driven by the CEO, then you could next sample or try to find a different case that doesn't even have a CEO, for example, or has a very different type of CEO, so that you would theoretically expect either similar or very dissimilar patterns to occur. And then you could go and test whether the reality meets your expectation. This would be called theoretically sampling. And finally, I mentioned this earlier, we distinguish not only between single and multiple, but also between embedded and holistic cases. Holistic cases are case studies that investigate a phenomenon holistically on a global level, typically where the case is an organization. That is very often the case. Embedded designs means that what the subject matter of interest is actually occurring multiple times in a study of one or several cases. Yeah, so my example here would be that you could study projects within organization. The case is the organization, but the project is the unit of analysis. And of course, organizations typically do not just run one project at a time, they run multiple projects. And this is the end of this brief video lecture on case study design. Thank you for listening.